I had been driving for hours, the highway stretching endlessly before me like some kind of black river, the trees on either side flickering in and out of view as my headlights swept past. It was late, close to 2 a.m., and the only thing keeping me awake was the desperate promise of a warm bed at the motel I'd booked just outside of town. I had taken this route before, but something about this drive felt wrong. The further I went, the quieter it got. I don't mean just fewer cars, I mean it was silent. No wind, no crickets, no hum of distant traffic, just the sound of my tires slicing through the darkness. Then I saw him, a man, standing just beyond the shoulder of the road. He wasn't walking or waiting. He was standing still, facing the highway, his head tilted slightly downward, his hands in his pockets. As I passed, I swear I saw his head turn to follow me. I told myself I was just seeing things. Long drive, tired mind, nothing more. Then, about 10 minutes later, I saw another man. Same suit, same posture, same eerie stillness. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel. This one was positioned closer to the road. As I passed him, my headlights revealed his face, completely void of expression, his eyes locked onto my car like he had been waiting for me. Panic tightened in my chest. I wasn't hallucinating. I had seen him twice. I hit the gas. I just wanted to reach the motel, get some rest, and forget whatever the hell was happening out here. I was about 20 minutes from my stop when I saw the third man. This time, he was standing in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes, tires screeching against the pavement as my car came to a sharp stop just feet from where he stood. My headlights hit him dead on, illuminating his rigid figure. His mouth opened, like he wanted to say something. Then, he took one step forward. I threw the car in reverse, heart pounding so hard I could barely think. His face remained blank as he started walking toward me. Not running, walking. I yanked the wheel, throwing the car into a desperate U-turn. That's when I saw them. Not just one, or two, or three. At least a dozen men in suits were standing along the road behind me, all staring. I floored it. My speedometer climbed. 50, 60, 70, but my hands were shaking too hard to hold the wheel steady. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, expecting to see them chasing after me. But they didn't move. They didn't need to, because one of them was already inside my car. I caught the figure in my mirror just a split second before I felt the cold breath against my ear. You should have stopped the first time. The scream ripped from my throat before my brain could even register what was happening. My hands jerked the wheel, and the car veered off the road. The last thing I saw before impact was the dark outline of a suit, standing just outside my window. Then everything went black. I woke to the smell of gasoline and the distant hum of the highway. My skull throbbed, and my vision swam as I forced my eyes open. The car was tilted at an awkward angle, the front end buried in the brush off the side of the road. My seatbelt had locked tight around me, pressing into my chest like a vice. For a moment, I thought I was alone. Then I saw him, the man in the suit. He stood just outside my window, watching, unmoving, as if he had been waiting for me to wake up. I scrambled for the door handle, but my hands were shaking too badly to grip it properly. Move. Get out. Now. My breath came in short, sharp gasps as I finally threw the door open and stumbled out onto the damp earth. The man still didn't move. I could feel him watching me, and every nerve in my body screamed at me to run. But something else kept me frozen. Something I hadn't noticed before. The trees were filled with them. Dozens of them. Men in suits, perched in the branches like grotesque, oversized birds, their faces blank, their bodies impossibly still. Their black shoes gleamed in the moonlight as they crouched in unnatural positions, their heads tilted in perfect unison. I stumbled backward, my foot catching on a root. My hands shot out, fingers clawing at the dirt as I tried to get up, but my limbs felt heavy, like something unseen was weighing me down. And then, the first one moved. One of the men dropped from the trees, landing silently on the ground directly in front of me. His face was barely a foot from mine, his expression empty, his skin waxy and raw. I was too stunned to scream. His mouth opened, but there was no sound. Only silence. The next thing I knew, I was being dragged. My body lurched as unseen hands clamped around my arms, yanking me backward. My vision blurred, and a deep, humming pressure filled my skull, like the air itself was vibrating. I twisted, kicking wildly, but there was nothing behind me. No one was holding me, and yet I was being pulled. I fought against the invisible force, my fingers clawing at the dirt, but I couldn't stop it. My body was sliding toward the figures, drawn by something I couldn't see or understand. Then, I saw my car. Or rather, what was inside it. I was still in the driver's seat. My own body, slumped against the steering wheel, blood trickling from my forehead. Unmoving. I wasn't being dragged toward the suited figures. I was being dragged away from my own body. This isn't real. It can't be real. I clenched my eyes shut, willing myself to wake up, to snap out of whatever horrific dream I had fallen into. But the pressure in my skull grew stronger, like something was burrowing into my mind, rewriting the way I understood reality itself. A cold, dry hand pressed against my face. My eyes snapped open. The man in the suit was right in front of me. And this time, he spoke. "You should have never stopped." A whisper. A command. The world fractured. A blinding, white-hot light split through the darkness, and suddenly, I was gasping for breath. Back inside my car. The radio was playing static. The windshield was cracked. My body was shaking uncontrollably, my fingers gripping the wheel so tightly that my knuckles had gone white. But the road was empty. No men. No suits. Only the long stretch of highway, bathed in the eerie glow of my flickering headlights. I let out a ragged sob, barely able to process what had just happened. My heart was still hammering against my ribs, my body drenched in sweat. I was alive. Somehow. I didn't stop to question it. Didn't stop to think. I turned the key, slammed my foot on the gas, and didn't look back. By the time I reached the motel, the sky was beginning to lighten, the first hints of dawn creeping over the horizon. I staggered inside, barely able to form words as I checked in. The desk clerk barely glanced at me, sliding my key across the counter before returning to his paperwork. I climbed the stairs to my room, my body aching, my thoughts spiraling. I just needed to sleep, to forget. But as I reached the door, I froze. The room number on my keycard was the same number as my license plate. I turned, my breath catching in my throat. At the end of the hallway, barely visible in the dim motel lighting, a man in a suit stood perfectly still, watching, waiting. And this time, I knew he wasn't just in my head. Story 2. I was driving through the back roads of Pennsylvania, cutting through the darkness in a desperate attempt to get home faster. It was past midnight, and the road was completely deserted, surrounded by thick forest on both sides. The only sound was the steady hum of my engine and the occasional crackle from the car radio. I had been on the road for hours, and fatigue was beginning to creep in. My eyes felt heavy, and my mind started to wander when suddenly, a ding from my dashboard snapped me back to attention. Low fuel. I sighed, rubbing my face as I pulled up my GPS, searching for the nearest gas station. The only option was one about 6 miles ahead, a nameless little dot on the map. I had no choice but to go there. The road twisted and turned through the thick trees, and as I finally pulled into the gas station, a sense of unease washed over me. The place was completely empty except for a single rusted pickup truck parked near one of the pumps. I slowed down, eyeing the station's dimly lit convenience store. The lights inside flickered, casting eerie shadows on the dirty windows. It felt abandoned, but the presence of that old truck told me otherwise. As I stepped out of my car, I glanced toward the truck. A man stood beside it, his hands resting on the gas pump. He wasn't moving, just standing there, watching me. I quickly turned my gaze away and hurried inside. The store smelled of old coffee and dust. The cashier, a pale, wiry man with deep-set eyes, barely looked up as I approached the counter. I paid for my gas in cash, then grabbed a bottle of water before stepping back outside. The man by the truck was gone, but the driver's side door was still open. The truck was still running. A strange chill ran down my spine. I quickened my pace, pumping gas as fast as I could while keeping my eyes locked on the truck. The moment my tank was full, I jumped back into my car and sped off. I was barely a mile down the road when I saw something up ahead. The same pickup truck. It was parked off to the side, partially hidden among the trees. But the strangest part? The driver's side door was still open, just like before. My pulse quickened. That was impossible. There was no way he could have gotten ahead of me. I had left before him. I tried to convince myself it was a coincidence. Maybe there were 2 similar trucks. Maybe I was overthinking things. Then I heard the ding again, but this time it wasn't from my dashboard. It was coming from the back seat. A cold wave of terror washed over me. My breath caught in my throat as I reached for the rearview mirror, heart pounding. There was nothing there, just darkness. But then, just as my eyes adjusted, I saw something. A shape. A silhouette, barely visible in the shadows of the back seat. I wasn't alone. A whisper, so soft I almost thought I imagined it, brushed against my ear. "Keep driving." My foot slammed on the gas, the car lurching forward as I gripped the wheel with trembling hands. The whisper had been right next to me, but there was no one in the passenger seat. I refused to look in the mirror again. The road stretched ahead, winding deeper into the woods, but no matter how far I drove, the gas station never seemed to disappear from my mirror. It was still behind me, still just a mile back. No matter how fast I went, no matter how many turns I took, I was trapped in a loop. And the thing in my back seat? It was getting closer. My hands were locked onto the steering wheel, knuckles white as I pressed the accelerator down as far as it would go. The car roared forward, the speedometer climbing 60, 70, 80, but my surroundings refused to change. I glanced in the rearview mirror again, expecting to see the endless stretch of dark road behind me. Instead, I saw the gas station, still sitting there, still a mile back. I let out a strangled breath, my throat tightening with fear. This wasn't possible. I had driven at least 15 miles since I left that station. I should have been nowhere near it. A cold presence filled the car, creeping over my skin like icy fingers. The whisper had come from the back seat, but when I looked before, there was nothing there. I swallowed hard. I didn't want to check again. I had to check again. My heart slammed against my ribs as I forced myself to glance at the mirror. This time, I saw something. A shape in the back seat. A figure. It was still just a shadow, but it was solid now, not a trick of the eyes. I could see the faintest outline of limbs, of a head. It was sitting just behind me, motionless. I opened my mouth to scream, but before the sound could escape, the car jerked violently to the right. I barely managed to regain control before I crashed into the trees lining the side of the road. But it wasn't me who had pulled the wheel. Something else had. I gasped for air, blinking sweat from my eyes as I fought to steady the car. I had to get out. I had to escape this loop. Then, the radio flickered to life. A deep, distorted voice crackled through the speakers, low, guttural, and inhuman. "You should have stayed." The headlights flickered, plunging the road into momentary darkness before blasting back on. The trees ahead looked different now, taller, twisted, wrong. The road was no longer paved. It had turned into a narrow dirt path, one that I did not recognize. I slammed on the brakes. I didn't care about the shadow in my back seat anymore. I had to get out of this car. The moment I opened the door, the night air hit me, thick and humid, carrying a smell like damp earth and rot. The world around me wasn't the same as before. This wasn't Pennsylvania. I had driven into somewhere else. The air felt too dense, the trees impossibly tall, their branches weaving together to block out the sky. I could see a faint glow ahead, deep in the forest, a light, pulsing softly, almost like it was breathing. And then I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming from behind me. I turned. The gas station clerk was standing in the middle of the road. Except, it wasn't him anymore. His limbs were too long, his skin stretched tight like old leather. His eyes were black, empty voids, and his mouth hung too wide, as if it had been unhinged. "You never left." I stumbled backward, my foot catching on a root. My hands hit the ground, the dirt warm beneath my fingers. The thing that looked like the gas station clerk stepped forward, and then another set of footsteps sounded, and another, and another. Figures emerged from the trees, dozens of them, their faces twisted and wrong, their bodies moving too smoothly, like they were gliding instead of walking. I turned, ready to run, but something grabbed my ankle. I screamed, kicking wildly as I looked down, only to see another hand reaching out from the dirt itself. A hand that looked just like mine. It gripped me tightly, pulling me downward, into the ground. I fought, clawing at the dirt, but my legs were already sinking. I was being dragged down, as if the earth itself was swallowing me whole. And then I heard the whisper again. "You never left the station." The ground gave way beneath me. I plunged into blackness. I woke up with a gasp, my body jerking violently. I was inside my car. The radio was playing static, and the gas station was still right in front of me, like I had never left. I sat there, frozen, my hands gripping the wheel so hard that my fingers ached. Then, the door of the gas station slowly creaked open, and the clerk stepped out. His face was normal again. His eyes were human. He looked at me like I had just arrived, like I hadn't already driven away. He waved and smiled. I didn't move. I didn't breathe, because in my rearview mirror, I saw something sitting in my back seat. And this time, it wasn't just a shadow. Story 3. I should have stayed home. It was supposed to be an easy drive, just a straight shot upstate to visit Todd. We had been doing long distance for almost a year, and I was the one who usually made the trip since he had his own place, while I was still living with my sister. The weather had other plans. The further north I got, the worse the snow became. The forecast had warned of a blizzard, but Todd and I agreed it was better to beat it tonight than wait until morning when the roads were fully buried. Now, staring at the blinding sheets of white that crashed against my windshield, I was starting to regret that decision. The road ahead was barely visible. The high beams only seemed to reflect off the snow, making it even harder to see. My wipers scraped across the glass at full speed, but it wasn't enough. I needed to pull over. Now, luckily, I had just passed a small diner with a few flickering neon signs in the window. It looked open. I made a sharp turn into the lot, my tires skidding slightly on the icy pavement before I managed to stop. I took a deep breath, my fingers still clenched around the steering wheel. Just a quick break. Some food, some coffee, then I'd be back on my way. The moment I stepped inside, the heat hit me like a wall. The place smelled of old coffee, fried food, and something else. Something stale. A waitress, a tired-looking woman with deep lines under her eyes, glanced at me from behind the counter. "You're out late," she muttered. "Yeah, the storm's making it rough," I said, taking a seat at the bar. She nodded knowingly. "You shouldn't be driving in this." "Yeah, I know." I ordered a coffee, rubbing warmth back into my hands as I glanced around the nearly empty diner. That's when I noticed him, a man sitting at the far end of the counter, spinning slightly in his bar stool. He wasn't eating or drinking, just watching me. He smiled when he saw me looking. "You traveling alone?" he asked. I hesitated. "Meeting someone." His smile didn't fade. "Storm's gonna get worse. You might want to find a place to stay the night." I nodded politely, turning back toward my coffee, but my stomach twisted. Something about him felt off. The waitress returned, sliding a small notepad across the counter toward me. I frowned, confused, until I saw what she had written on it. "Don't talk to him. Don't leave alone." My heart skipped a beat. I didn't look at her. I didn't look at him. I just kept my eyes on the cup in front of me, my pulse hammering in my ears. The waitress cleared her throat. "Storm's bad, huh? Maybe you should stay at the Evergreen Motel down the road. Real close." The man at the bar grinned. "That's a good idea. I'm staying there too." A chill slithered down my spine. The waitress's fingers tightened on the counter, knuckles going white. That's when I realized she wasn't talking to me anymore. She was warning him. I left the diner fast, wrapping my coat around me as I stepped into the bitter cold. The storm was raging even harder now, the wind howling through the empty parking lot. The man had stayed behind. For now. I fumbled for my keys, shoving them into the ignition and locking my doors the second I got inside. The little neon sign ahead flashed Evergreen Motel, 1 mile. I didn't want to stop, but my car wasn't built for snow, and the road was already turning into a death trap. If I kept driving in this storm, I'd end up in a ditch. I had no choice. The motel was empty except for a single flickering light in the office window. Snow crunched under my tires as I pulled into the lot. There were only 3 cars here, and one of them belonged to the man from the diner. I swallowed hard, gripping the wheel so tightly my fingers ached. The lobby was locked, but after ringing the buzzer a few times, an old man finally appeared from a back room, moving slow like he had just woken up. He barely looked at me, just slid me a key and muttered, "Room 12." I forced a smile, grabbed the key, and hurried back outside. The wind had picked up, nearly slamming me into the door as I rushed toward my room. I glanced at the other parked cars, trying to tell which room the man from the diner was in. There were no footprints leading away from his car, which meant he hadn't gone to his room yet, which meant he was still somewhere nearby. I practically threw myself inside my room, locking the door behind me and pushing a chair against it for good measure. The room was small, old floral wallpaper, scratchy-looking sheets, a tiny TV that hummed with static. It smelled like dust and something faintly sweet, like rotting wood. I sat on the bed, trying to shake the unease crawling up my spine. I just needed to rest, just for a few hours. Then I'd leave. Then I heard it, a knock at my door. I froze. The knock came again, louder this time. I stayed completely still, barely breathing. Then, from outside, "I know you're in there." I felt my stomach drop. The voice wasn't coming from the door. It was coming from the vent. I couldn't move. The voice had come from the vent, not the door. I turned my head slowly, my breath caught in my throat. The metal vent cover near the floor was just big enough for a hand, or a face, to fit through. I expected to see an eye staring back at me, but there was nothing, just darkness. A silence stretched between me and whatever was on the other side. I didn't dare breathe too loudly. Then, the voice came again, low and slow. "I saw you at the diner." I jerked back, my body slamming against the headboard. My pulse pounded in my ears. "I watched you park. Watched you run inside." The vent cover rattled. I slapped a hand over my mouth, fighting back a scream. I should have run. I should have left the moment I saw his car outside. I wasn't alone in this room. Or worse, maybe I wasn't alone inside these walls. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone. I tried dialing Todd, but the screen flashed in no service. The storm was messing with the signal. I could only pray the Wi-Fi still worked. I pulled up my messages, my fingers shaking as I typed. "Me. There's someone in the motel. Someone watching me." 3 dots appeared. Then, "Todd, what? Are you safe?" I didn't know how to answer that. My body was screaming at me to get out, but my legs felt like concrete. The vent rattled again, and then something slid out. A piece of folded paper. It landed softly on the stained motel carpet. A tiny, crumpled note, like something passed under a door in class. I stared at it, my heart hammering. I didn't want to read it. I had to. Slowly, I leaned forward, snatching the paper off the ground. My hands were shaking so badly it took me a few tries to unfold it. There were only 4 words, scrawled in jagged handwriting. "Don't look under the bed." My stomach dropped. I could hear movement. A faint, rustling sound. Not from the vent. From beneath the bed. I scrambled backward, slamming into the nightstand. The lamp rocked, sending shadows stretching wildly across the walls. The rustling stopped. The silence was worse. Then, the bed creaked. Something was shifting underneath. I was going to throw up. I bolted toward the door, yanking at the lock. My hands were slick with sweat, fumbling as I tried to rip the chair away from the handle. Then I heard it. The sound of fingernails scraping across the floorboards. A slow, deliberate dragging. I didn't look. I didn't want to see what was beneath there. I yanked the door open and stumbled into the freezing night. The wind howled around me, snow slamming against my face as I ran toward my car. But then I saw it. The man from the diner, standing at the edge of the motel lot, barely visible in the snow, waiting. I had nowhere to go. I had 2 choices: run back inside, or run toward him. Then, something brushed against my ankle. I screamed. I didn't think. I just ran. Not toward the diner man. Not back inside. I bolted toward the motel office. The old man at the front desk barely reacted when I slammed into the lobby, gasping for breath. His eyes flickered toward me once before going back to his newspaper. "You okay?" he muttered, like I had just tripped and skinned my knee. Not like I was running for my life. "There's someone," I gasped, pointing toward my room. Under the bed." The old man sighed, rubbing his temples. "What room you in?" 12. His hand froze. His eyes, dull and exhausted just moments ago, snapped toward me. "What did you say?" I swallowed hard. "Room 12. He went pale. I saw his hands tremble as he slowly reached for something under the counter. "Keys." He slid them toward me. "Take 13, he murmured. "Sleep in there. Do not go back inside that room." I blinked at him. "What?" "Take the key and go." His voice was different now. Tight. Urgent. Like he wasn't just telling me. He was begging me. I didn't argue. I grabbed the key and bolted. Room 13 was at the very end of the hall. I slammed the door shut behind me, pressing my back against it as my breath came in short, ragged gasps. My hands were still shaking, my skin still crawling. I checked everywhere, under the bed, in the closet, even in the vent. Nothing. I wasn't going to sleep, but I was safe. Or so I thought. At 3:17 a.m., I woke up to the sound of knocking. Not at the door, at the wall. A slow, rhythmic tapping coming from room 12. I buried myself under the covers, squeezing my eyes shut. Then the knocking stopped. Silence. And then, a click. My door unlocked. My heart stopped. I hadn't even gotten up before the door swung open on its own. The hallway was dark, but I saw them. Dozens of hands, reaching out from underneath the door of room 12. Fingers curling along the floorboards, dragging themselves toward me. I screamed. The lights flickered, and then everything went black. I woke up in my car. The sun was rising. The lot was empty. There was no snow on the ground. No storm. No footprints, just the motel, sitting quietly behind me. But as I turned the key in the ignition, heart hammering in my chest, I noticed something in my passenger seat. A crumpled note. I picked it up, my fingers numb as I unfolded it. For words, written in jagged handwriting. Don't look under the bed. I didn't. I just drove, and never looked back.